How's it going, everyone? Welcome back. Hopefully, it's having a lovely day. So, draft season, it's still a little bit out there. Big free agency coming up with the moves happening there is going to dictate a lot of what happens in the draft. But I think there's also quite a bit that can happen between now and then, especially with the T. Higgins situation with free agency, what the Bengals can do with the draft based on how they do in free agency and based on the assets they may or may not acquire heading up to the draft. And a big thing that's really starting to catch my attention of late, and it's probably not going to happen because the Bengals haven't traded up in the draft in the first round since I think it was 1995. It's been almost 20-year anniversary. Think about it, Mike. Think about it, 20-year anniversary. I might as well get in on that. It's almost been not 20, I think 20. That's 30. It's almost been 30 years. That's crazy. That's a lot. That's a long time. But I'm here to say today that the Bengals need to think about doing it. The Bengals need to think heavily about doing it. I think this is a team that, there's multiple holes that need to be filled, but there's nothing more important that needs to be filled other than an elite playmaker on the defensive side of an elite game changer, we should say, on the defensive side of the ball, or an elite player on that offensive line. I'll die on the hill and say it. Joe Burrow doesn't need two elite wide receivers. You give him one good weapon. He doesn't need two elite wide receivers. He doesn't need the elite receiver tight end. You give him one top 10 weapon, and you give him, the average Joes around him after that with an elite offensive line, and he's going to be a top five production offense every single year in the league, and it'll probably win you a couple MVPs. No question in my mind. That being said, you go into the draft and say you need to win in the trenches. The Bengals still have a lot of holes in the trenches. And I think it's so important to understand that, hey, the Bengals have been swinging and missing a lot in the trenches in the first round, specifically in the offensive line. And it's going to happen. But I think the closer you get to the cream of the crop, the top two players, maybe the top three players, the more and more confident you are in hitting on those players, especially from a tackle position or an edge rusher position or an interior defensive lineman position. And that really starts to raise the question is, you see guys like Fuega or more Latham than Fuega. And Latham, you see some holes in the game. You wonder if he falls to the Bengals, do you take him? Or is that kind of where you start to get in that, is he's going to work out? Is he a project? What's going to happen? Because if you get inside, all of a sudden top two at a position, especially top two, where it's kind of consensus around the league, people feel really good about them. It's not some sort of finesse player where he specializes in one thing or he's a speed guy or he's a size guy, which tends to be a lot of times, in a lot of positions, you get into the middle of the draft, or you're like, okay, wide receiver is one of those. You get the middle of the draft, it's like, all right, maybe we'll reach for the guy because he's got ridiculous speed. John Ross. Dang it, can't think of his name. Guy from the Raiders. Raiders took him 1 year. All that speed in the world didn't go. Ruggs. Henry Ruggs came from Ruggs. Those kind of situations where they have one asset, and that's kind of where J.C. Latham is. He's going to stop the power rushers because of his elite size and his stature, and it's just impossible to get around him. But you say, okay, we're kind of hoping he polishes the rest of his game with the footwork, with the speed, being able to handle the speed rush in this game, those kind of situations. And he very well could. That could very well happen. But if you can guarantee yourself more of a lock that is a complete football player that's got that potential to be an elite player and do that for 4 or 5 years on this team, that's huge. And you ain't got to pay, again, $20 million for that, $25 million for that in free agency. Then you can go and fill a couple more holes with that money. So it's really, really important that the Bengals hit on winning these first-round draft picks in a big way, something they haven't really done in the Zach Taylor era, something they ain't done in a while in general, aside from, the slam dunks, Jamar Chase, Joe Hibro, they followed to him. There was no way they wasn't going to be able to get those. You couldn't have missed kind of situations. So they need those really badly. And when you look at the Zach Taylor era of drafting, the Bengals have brought in Cordell Volson and Evan McPherson outside of the third round. No one else in that time has been a starter and a viable starter. I mean, you can look back until Carl Lawson, I believe that was the last time the Bengals drafted a good player outside of the top 3 rounds. The Bengals entered this year with a couple fifths, a couple sevenths, a sixth, a fourth, and they got a lot of draft picks this year. And I don't think exactly, they're going to, you don't sell the house to trade up to like the top 5 or the top 7 or top 8. But I do think you look at a guy like Fuega, a perfect example, a really good offensive lineman. And you look at the teams ahead of them, you got to think at least 2 come off the board. And there's a chance he's coming off, he's the third one. And you look at when he's like the third one coming off the board, maybe in the, I want to say the 10 to 13 range, maybe. And then you say, okay, Bengals move up 4 or 5 spots. When they see that their guy's kind of at the top of the board, top choice, You move up 4 or 5 spots, move away a couple of those draft picks. I don't know how much that would cost. I can imagine, again, moving up, you move up 10 spots, it's going to cost you a lot. But maybe you move up 4 or 5 spots. You say, hey, we'll give you a third and a fourth, or, a third, fourth, and a fifth, and you give us back a third. I don't know if they do that. It depends where they're picking. Maybe a later third, something like that. Some sort of situation where they move up. Where I think it's important. It's important that they come out of this draft with 2 very good football players. Everything else, it is what it is. I mean, if you really think about it, if you could do that every single year, you come out 2 really good football players, you're in a really good situation. Most teams, even the Bengals draft, you'll see it twice, and if you get 2 really good football players, pull out an average one after that, I mean, you're in a good situation. You consider that 3 a year. That's solid. I think it's important here for the Bengals, just based on what they've done in the past. You gotta do what you're strong at this point, and understanding, some weaknesses in the draft. If you can get those guarantees, get those locks, I think it's as important as ever, just based on the fact that they haven't drafted well deeper in the drafts. It's kind of went with, it's kind of worked in situations where they went with best possible available, won some of the leadership roles, and that's going to be something they continue to do. You can expect that's going to be a lock there. They're going to have these positive leader type players they're drafting, and it's worked really well for them, and it's really transitioned to the playoffs. I mean, you got to give Zach Taylor so much credit on that. Making sure you're drafting team captains, drafting leaders throughout these drafts, because again, it's so important when they're in the leadership roles, they're under the spotlight, they're in those pressure situations, whatever. In college, that translates so much better into the playoffs, so much better into the big games, and we're seeing that for the Cincinnati Bengals, and we're seeing that also from a resiliency standpoint, where they don't just roll over halfway through the game where they're down 2 scores. They stay in, they play with a lot of confidence, a lot of poise throughout the game. All that important. We've seen some strong things coming to the Zach Taylor regimen. We'll see if they pursue something, though, that can potentially gotta get some. I'd love that, a game wrecker on defense. Somebody can close out football games, or a game changer on the offensive side of the offensive line as well, that can really, again, close out football games running the football. We'll see what happens. I love y'all's thoughts. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.